Okay, Baruchim Habayim. So we finished the Chag of Pesach, and now we're in the days of counting the Omer. And as usual, I'm getting responses from those that are claiming that the counting of the Omer starts on Sunday, and they get that because they take Vayikra chapter 23, verse 15, very literal when it says, "You shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day." So they say this is the Shabbat, yes, from the day when you bring the Omer offering waving Omer of the waving. 7 weeks they shall be complete. So okay, so it looks like it says you count after the Sabbath. But let's go to the Hebrew for a minute. And in verse 15, verse 15, Usfartem, it says, Lechem mimachrat ha-Shabbat. Okay, so it says, after the Shabbat, mimachrat ha-Shabbat. Now this word, mimachrat ha-Shabbat, only appears a few times in the Torah, in the Tanakh. And the sages talk about a hermeneutic, a Jewish hermeneutic that's been tradition going all the way back to Mount Sinai. And this is called the Gezerah Shavah. What is a Gezerah Shavah? When you see a similar word in the Torah and it connects to the same context. So here's an example here of explaining it. So a Gezerah Shavah is made between two words that refer to the same general concept. Even the words themselves are not identical or even similar. For example, in the Gemara it says regarding Vayikra chapter 14, the laws of the saras of the house, that since the Torah speaks of the Kohen returning Veshav HaKohen to examine the infected house at the end of the first week of its quarantine, in verse 39 it also speaks of the Kohen coming, Uva HaKohen, to examine the house again at the end of the second week of the quarantine. In verse 44, now the certain rules that apply at the end of the first week also apply at the end of the second week, and Rashi explains more about this. Although the words Veshav, return, and Uva, come, are not the same, they basically mean the same thing in the context. A Gezerah Shavah may be made between those two words. So we see the words Kohen matching up. So here, the Chazam Cipher, he actually explains that Mimachrat actually has a Gezerah Shavah. And first, he explains about the recalling of the manna. He actually says, okay, does it mean Shabbos or Yom Tov? On the morrow of the rest day, the Kohen shall wave it. And he begins to explain that the practitioners of traditional Judaism, known as the Proshim, the Pharisees, and the Zedukim, the Sadducees, a sect that denied the divinity of Torah Shel Pei, oral Torah, occurred over the correct interpretation of the phrase Mimachrat HaShabbat. According to the tradition, the term Shabbat refers to Yom Tov of the Pesach, leading to the conclusion that the Korban HaOmer is offered on the second day of Pesach, Mimachrat HaShabbat. The Sadducees interpreted the term Shabbat literally as referring to the weekly Sabbath. Consequently, they insisted the Korban HaOmer always be offered on Sunday, the actual day that follows Shabbos, Mimachrat HaShabbat, and the Shavuos, celebrated 7 weeks later, only occur on a Sunday. And the Chazam Cipher points out how the Sadducees, first of all, they were heretics. They went against oral Torah. Even Yeshua kept the oral Torah. And we see that we're going to prove them wrong here by saying, the Chazam Cipher points out that the expression Mimachrat HaShabbat, the day after Shabbos, instead of simply saying Mimachrat HaPesach, it could have said that. But one thing I want to point out is even in the Gospels, the Pesach is considered a Shabbat HaGadol, a Shabbat. And it even says that we are to rest and not work on Pesach. So how do we know? There's a Gezerah Shavah going to Yehoshua, Joshua, chapter 5, verse 11, where describing Klal Israel's first Pesach in Eretz Israel, and almost immediately after they crossed the Jordan River. And rather, instead of saying Mimachrat HaShabbat, it says Mimachrat HaPesach, and there's the Gezer Shavah. So I'll show you here. It says here in verse 11, on the day of the Pesach offering, says in verse 11, Vayichulu me'avur ha'aretz mimachrat ha'pesach mitzvot v'chalu be'etzem hayom hazeh. Be'etzem hayom hazeh means on that day as well, because this is even saying that in the Torah it even tells us you shall convoke on this very day in verse 21, but it doesn't even tell you what day it is. But the wording again is Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. There's no date. How do we know when Shavuos is? We are to count 50 days. So I don't even understand when those count Sunday. They end up celebrating Shavuos on a different day. When was the Torah given? On the 6th of Sivan. There's a machloket with the 7, but I'm not going to get into that. But it says here, on that same day in the book of Joshua, when they ate the produce of the land, the manna ceased. So we see that they immediately did the Korban Omer immediately the day after Pesach. And I think most individuals that assume that it's after the Sabbath and they start counting on a Sunday completely miss this, and you're completely wrong. And so everyone out there that's counting on Sunday is really making up their own rules. And yeah, continue to study.